Okay, so today we are going to be introducing to you the first in our series of test prep 1 and 2 classes for the DAT and the OAT, since they are basically the same test, as you'll see in just a moment. We're going to be focusing on the biology portion of it today, just looking at a few of the strategies and some of the content that will be on the test. So let's get started and look at the schedule of the test so you can see what is going on there. So first off, the structure of the DAT and the structure of the OAT, as you can see, I'm just flipping back and forth. What do you see is really the only difference between the two?
$10 minutes and total time difference.
Yeah, 10 minutes, but something more for those OAT people.
The physics test.
Yes, you got physics on the OAT versus the perceptual ability test on the DAT. Other than that, these tests are literally the same. So when you hear people talking about DAT, they're not leaving out the OAT people. They're really bringing those people in to those conversations as well because it's the same content. So do I have any OAT takers here, actually? Oh, we got one, a grand total of one. So you're the one, the only, the proud optometry student. So thank you for being here. We will have a special session just for physics for you later on in the cycle. So do keep your eye on that. So for the rest of you guys, we're going to be covering a session specifically on the PAT. So that being said, looking at the rest of this, the test is basically the same content-wise, especially when it comes to bio, GChem, and OChem. One of the things to note is that in the Survey of Natural Sciences, you have 90 minutes to answer 100 questions. And there's going to be biology, GChem, and OChem as part of that. The thing is, they don't tell you when you need to move on to the next question. So this is probably the first tactic you need to recognize about tackling biology, is that you should probably go faster on those 40 questions and plan to spend only about 3/4 of a minute on each of those questions. Because by doing so, how much of your 90 minutes have you used up? If you're using 3/4 of a minute for those 40 questions, how many minutes does that take? Don't get out the calculator because you're not going to get to use one. But yeah, 30 minutes. So the reason why you want to go a little bit faster in the bio is probably because you're going to be more adept at the bio questions. Because one of the things that happens in this section is if you don't practice monitoring your time on the bio and the GChem and the OChem, you spend too much time on the bio and the GChem and you don't get a chance to finish the OChem. Why that's a problem is because you get a sub-score for each of those 3 subjects. So let's say you get a 20 on the bio, a 20 on the GChem, but you didn't get through all the OChem, you only got a 15. What does that average out to be? Is that going to be closer to 20 or closer to 15? Well, unfortunately, it's going to be closer to 15. And you don't want to do that. And for our optometry person, where the scoring system is a little bit different, you're going to be talking about a 200 versus a 210, 220 instead of like a 20 as your score, like your target score. So if you want to stick afterwards, then we can talk a little bit about how the scoring system is different for OAT than the DAT. But so if I have 20, 20, 15, that's a way worse score than if I get like a 19, 19, 19, because I spent equal weight across the board for all 3 subjects. Because 20, 20, 15 is less than a 19. So pacing through this section is actually pretty darn important, that you spend a reasonable amount of time on each of the 3 types of questions. There will be no indicator, though, that you need to do that. So that's the first big thing. So how many minutes do you guys want to spend on the bio?
Threefold, a quarter, like 3/4 of.
3/4 minute on each question. So how many minutes overall, everybody? You can just type your answers in the chat box. Feel free. And in between, can you mute yourself? Because we can hear you like sipping your tea or whatever you're sipping there. Thank you. That's not everybody. Come on, everybody. Make sure you're all with me. There we go. 30 minutes. That's right. Cool. So you want to spend 30 minutes, no more, really no less, honestly. Don't go too fast. That's the other thing. You want to pace yourself so you're spending about the same amount of time on each of those 3 chunks. Don't rush through it because that's how you make silly mistakes. And we'll see some of that probably happen today. So here is the content for the biology section of the DAT and the OAT. It's the same. You might first note that that says that there's going to be a change in the DAT biology test specifications in 2021. At this point, I anticipate that this is not actually going to happen. I spoke with a DAT representative. It was, I want to say back in June, maybe July, and they said that it looks like the changes that they were planning aren't going to happen, obviously because of COVID. So we're not going to be seeing any major changes on the bio section this coming year. I will say, however, that is all subject to change. You probably do want to keep an eye on that. If it is going to change, here's my thoughts. What are some topics here that seem completely unnecessary for dentistry? Evolution and ecology. I would agree. Genetics, I don't know if that's totally unnecessary. I think that's fairly relevant, just because that's a fairly common topic that you're going to see in many biology classes. The taxa, the organization relationship of major taxa, probably something, yeah, like diversity of life. There's one more if you didn't catch it. Look under cell metabolism. What seems a little odd there? Photosynthesis. What is that about? They actually test you on plant biology on this test. So you will have to probably brush up on photosynthesis and the Calvin cycle, light and dark reactions, so to speak. So that's like a really weird thing to me, why that's on a DAT or an OAT. Why does that in there? So you do need to remember that kind of information. Currently, what I'm gonna guess is that the changes they're probably gonna make involve those topics. That's what I'm hoping. That's what the rumor is, that those topics might be getting removed and they're gonna put more of an emphasis on human biology rather than some of this non-human biology stuff. So, but currently, yes, you do still need to remember how photosynthesis works and Calvin cycle works for this test. And the relationship major taxa, that is actually not unreasonable, being able to say compare bacteria to viruses to animals to plants, like at a cellular level, eukaryotes versus prokaryotes, but on a level of like some of the questions, and I'm going to show you an example of a question that shows up on most tests of just straight up classification of a critter, that seems kind of unnecessary, and that is hopefully what they're going to be getting rid of. So if anything, what I see happening with these specifications is they're going to get more specific and just they're going to take things off and not add much to it. So that should be a little bit more comforting, because we're probably not going to see it get harder. In fact, it might actually get a little bit easier, from a sense that it's going to be less coverage of random stuff that you don't really need to know. So now, what are we going to do the rest of the time today, you say? We're going to look at some specific questions and some of the strategies you can use on answering these types of questions. So as you can see in this section, these are basically just freestanding questions. There is no associated information with them. What they might do, if there is associated information, it will be embedded within the question itself. So this is not like the MCAT that you might have heard about. This is going to be just straight up do you know your answers to these things? That does not mean, however, you cannot use strategy to solve these questions. For example, this question looks very straightforward. I'm betting, like on the count of 3, everybody put down the letter they think it is. 1, 2, 3. Don't all answer at once. There we go. Yeah, we're pretty sure we can just go right to A on a question like this, that an autotroph obtains energy from light. Now, one of the things I want you to start doing when you're looking at questions and practicing questions is, let's be smart about it, because maybe the question isn't as quote unquote easy as this one is. So what's the trap answer? Let's identify some things about these answer choices that can be attractive. So which one of these is trap? Which one, if you're not paying attention, might you fall into? I'd say C is kind of a trap because it's like Autotroph and Chemotroph, they go together, right? They tend to come in pairs. So that's an identifiable trap that we would see. Chemotroph and Heterotroph, or sorry, Chemotroph and Autotroph are related. E is straight up the super trap because helio, sun, trophic. There is no heliotrophic. That's a made up word. Well, there might be heliotropic in some other perspective, but it is not a biologically relevant word. So we should get rid of answers like that before we fall for them. Be aware of the traps so we can cross them out. So heliotrope is a huge trap. What is another term here that just doesn't belong? Yeah, holotrophic. Now, it may come up, but it's a very rare word. A holotroph is a critter that consumes a whole other critter in whole. So like an amoeba is a holotroph. But that's a term you're probably not going to be seeing that often in this type of question. So the 3 common answers are autotroph, chemotroph, heterotroph. That's something to do before you just jump into answering what would be called a easy question. Get rid of the answer choices that don't make any sense, so now you're only choosing from a couple. And then, what is an autotroph? We know that one is energy from the light. What is a chemotroph? If you don't know exactly how to describe it, maybe give me a critter or a type of organism that is a chemotroph. I'll give you a hint. They live at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, near volcanic vents. We don't know that one? You ever heard of extremophiles? Yeah, it's a type of bacteria, archaebacteria. Archaebacteria are often chemotrophs because they don't use light, nor do they use complex chemicals. They usually use something in the environment like sulfur. And yeah, archaebacteria like that. So they often use sulfur in the environment to survive. And then heterotroph, what are heterotrophs? Yeah, what organisms do sustain themselves on food? That would be like a good example, yourself. You are a heterotroph, you eat food. So we know our answer here is autotroph. Boom, because we know its definition. But it's actually just, it's good to assess every single answer choice so you know you're not falling into a trap. That's the danger of these these short, easy questions, is sometimes they're so easy we don't think. We just automatically answer, and you might have picked heterotroph by accident, or you might have picked chemotroph by accident. And make sure you address every single answer in every single question. I cannot emphasize that more. All righty. Let's look at another question. This one. What's unique about this question? What makes this one different than the last question? And they usually do this, the same format. Yep. They're looking for the false answer because they're saying except. So we call these what I call them is a least not except question, an LNE question, because those are the terms you usually see in all caps: least, not, except, least, not, except. So one of the ways I would suggest you approach these questions is different from what we just did. Is like the last question we eliminated and then picked our answer. This one, I would do it as a true-false question to keep yourself from getting confused. So what I always do is I actually cross out the rest of the question. I will say each of the following cell organelles have a membranous structure. Cross the rest of this out. And I just answer that question as a true-false question. So does the Golgi complex have a membranous structure? True or false? That is a true statement. Centrioles, do they have a membranous structure? That would be false. Mitochondria, do they have a membranous structure? True. They have two membranes, in fact. Lysosomes, do they have a membranous structure? Yes, that's how they keep their lysing enzymes away from the rest of the cell contents. And endoplasmic reticulum, true or false? I mean, the endoplasmic reticulum is membrane, isn't it? It's where the membrane comes from in the first place. So A, C, D, and E are all actually contiguous with one another in a biological sense. So what is the correct answer here? Is it the true answer or is it the false answer? It's the false answer, so we're going to pick that one answer choice that is false. So I mean, this seems like it's a little excessive, right? Why would we have to do this for a question like this? The reason is if you just answer these questions the same way as you answer all the rest of the questions, then you tend to fall into the trap of picking one of the true statements and then going right to it. And what answer is probably never going to be the answer here? Which answer choice? A or E? Which one's probably never going to be the correct answer? A or E? I would say A, and here's why I would say A. Because, and besides the fact this is what the statistics say too, if you analyze standardized tests, A, if you see a true answer and you're doing the question wrong, what would you tend to want to pick? The first answer that you see is true. And so A, if it's true, is likely the answer you're going to pick if you're not doing the question correctly. So you're not going to put they're not going to put a false answer right there, because the false answer, if anything, you're going to, like, you know, if you're doing it correctly, you'll catch it. If you're doing it incorrectly, you're probably not going to pick the next answer down the road. You'll probably pick A. So it's just the logic of the way test takers work. It's the trap. So the correct answer is probably not A for these. Not saying it never is, but it's probably not A. All right, what else are they going to ask us about? Which of the following chiefly stimulates action of the respiratory center? All right, this is an interesting question. Let's see. Which of these two answers are kind of opposites of each other? A and C. A and C in a biological sense are opposites. Carbon dioxide versus lack of oxygen. In fact, they're saying the same thing, but in different molecules. So if there's opposites in a set of answer choices, or in this case, spiritual opposites, if there's this type of opposite within a set of answer choices, the answer is probably one of those two. So this is a common strategy to watch for. Now, not meaning you should ignore B, D, and E, you should address them, but I'm pretty certain one of my answers, or my answer is one of the two, A or C, just because of the opposite nature. Why is that? Again, it's test taker logic. Test takers tend to, on opposites, if they're going to pick the wrong one, they're going to pick the one that's opposite of the correct one. So they get, because they're getting a little confused of the way the question's going to go. So what I do is I identify my opposites and I try to make sure I can eliminate B, D, and E. Like, does relaxin seem like it's going to stimulate something? Probably not. I mean, it's in the name. It's relaxin. Something that's relaxed is not stimulated. How about inflation of the alveolus? So if I expand my alveoli, is that going to happen to stimulate something, or does that happen because something was stimulated? That's the result of stimulation, not the stimulation itself. Vagus nerve, that could work, right? But what does the vagus nerve do? And here's why we look for the opposite strategy. It looks like many people don't remember what the vagus nerve does. So even if I can't eliminate E outright, I'm still pretty certain it's going to be A or C. So that's why vagus nerve, I'm just going to put a question mark on it in my head because I don't remember what it does. I'll tell you what it does in a minute, but I'm going to question mark it because I'm not sure. So let me check the other two answers. Is lack of oxygen going to stimulate action in the respiratory center? Or is it carbon dioxide elevated in the blood? Which one is the stimulant? And this is where your bio knowledge comes into play. What do we think the answer is, A or C? And this is actually a trick question due to the fact that everybody wants to say it's C, but it's actually A. Weirdly enough, in biology, the lack of oxygen isn't what makes us breathe more. It's actually CO2, because when the CO2 changes, what happens to the pH of the blood? pH can either increase or decrease. And pH is what drives things. So it's the CO2 concentration which is going to drive the stimulation of the respiratory centers, because it's the change in pH that causes things to happen, not actually not having enough oxygen. Weirdly enough, our oxygen is controlled by carbon dioxide, by pH, basically. So what is the vagus nerve for? Vagus nerve is really, it's number one, it's primarily digestive. It serves a digestive role, as well as sensory role. So it's not really going to be stimulating action of the respiratory center nearly as effectively as, or as much as, the carbon dioxide. So vagus nerve, just not a choice there. So what's the lesson learned here? The answer is usually
one of the opposites.
One of the opposites, that's correct. So even if you're not sure on something like vagus nerve, you can still say, okay, it's probably not that one because of A versus C here. All right. Human heartbeat is initiated within the blank. So this is a question, like, I throw this one in here simply because sometimes there's just no real strategy. You just sometimes have to know the answer. So do we know the answer to this one? On your marks, get set, go, enter your answer choice. What do you think it is? A through E, A, B, C, D, or E? Yep, it's E. I mean, I suppose you could look at it like this is kind of a pair of spiritual opposites, but in the end of the day, it's not really opposites. Like, you just got to know that it's got to be sinuatrial node. They're trying to trick you here with things like sinus venosus and conus arteriosus. Those are different structures in and around the heart. Henson's node, they throw that in because of node. And so this one, you just got to know. Sometimes these questions are just straight up, you got to know it. Sinuatrial node consists of the pacemaker cells at the top of the heart, which triggers the beginning of the heartbeat from top down, and then that sends it to the AV node, which is pacemaker sending it from the bottom up. Well, from the top of the ventricle to the bottom of the ventricle and back up the ventricle. Fun stuff. Yay. So sometimes you just gotta know the answer. All right. So how do you guys want to approach this one? Yeah, let's do this from true or false. Let's note and just cross out the accept part and answer the question. Each of the following is synthesized by anterior lobe of the pituitary gland of vertebrates. Now, this kind of a question, this kind of content, there's a good way to learn it and there's a bad way to learn it. There's honestly really simple ways to learn a lot of stuff like this in biology, and this is something you want to incorporate and embrace strongly in your studying, and that is mnemonics. Does anybody know a mnemonic for the hormones produced by the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland? It's a very common one. I'm surprised you guys haven't seen this before. Flat peg, or sometimes flat pig. Wow, okay. Well, look for mnemonics. They're gonna be your best friend because flat peg tells you all the hormones that this thing is going to produce. So what do you think of C, follicle stimulating hormone? True or false? True, because follicle stimulating hormone is F, FSH. What do you think of L? Actually, not L, that's not in there. How about A? In the flat peg, that is. T also, so true and true, thyrotropic and adrenocorticotropic. Both of those are produced by the anterior pituitary because of A and T in the mnemonic device, respectively. How about growth hormone? True, because that's the G in flat peg. What about oxytocin? False. In fact, that's produced by what? Anybody remember? That's produced by the posterior pituitary. Which actually, by the way, so Parsa, you're not technically wrong because the pituitary gland is an extension of the hypothalamus, but we're talking specifically anterior, I can never say that right, anterior and posterior pituitary gland. So oxytocin is produced by the posterior. So just so you know what all the things are in flat peg, FSH, LH, ACTH, TSH, or in this case, they called it thyroid tropic instead of thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, GH, and endorphins. So mnemonics can be your best friend for very straightforward questions like this. When honestly, just use the letters in the first letter of each word can get you the right answer. So always look for ways to learn things mnemonically when it's just memorization facts like this. So there you go. That's your first mnemonic device, and you will surely find more. Here's a great example of what they do with this idea of kingdoms and taxa and things like this. So here they're talking about at some stage of development, all chordates have, and then they've got all these different terms in here, right? Don't try to deal with each answer alone. Try to deal with each part of the answer alone. So what I mean by that is, let's look first at pharynx. Do all chordates have a pharynx? Is that what being a chordate is? Anybody else besides Farhad here have a thought on that? So all chordates have a pharynx. You can't think of any examples. You can't think of any examples of chordates that don't have a pharynx? All right, we're going to keep it then. So we're not going to get rid of pharynx. How about vertebral column? Do all chordates have a vertebral column? Or golem, as I almost said, I guess. Column. No, they do not. They do not all have vertebra. So what answers can I get rid of? A is out. What else? Yeah, D is out. So, and this is what I mean by dealing with the terms one at a time. Don't deal with all one answer, deal with the terms. So I can get rid of A because vertebral column is wrong and get rid of D because vertebral column is wrong. I don't have to verify all of the things in there, just each of the terms. How about pharyngeal pouches? Do all chordates have pharyngeal pouches? I wouldn't get rid of E just because B and C are similar. I would deal with it in a term-by-term basis like we're doing. Similar answers, they do tend to be paired up a little bit, but that's not always true on these kinds of questions. But it does seem like pharyngeal pouches we're not super confident on. So, okay, let's move on. How about notochord? Do all chordates have a notochord? Yes, they do. So what answer can I get rid of? So that is actually why I would get rid of E, because it doesn't have notochord in it. And how about a dorsal tubular nerve cord? Yes, because the other possibility is ventral. Where's dorsal? Back or front? Top or bottom, I should say. It's on our back. It's on the top of the critter, because our backs are technically our tops. Humans are weird that way. And so, yeah, B is our best answer. Boom. So deal with them with one term at a time. And by the way, pharynx is not necessary. Not all chordates have pharynx. All of them have pharyngeal pouches, which can produce a pharynx. But like fish, they don't have pharynx. They have, because they don't have lungs. So fish, they have the pharyngeal pouches, which end up becoming gills and things like that. So like there's little things like that we may not have understood or known, but if we use the other terminology, we can actually get this figured out. And there we go. That's how we do it. Here's probably the most annoying type of question, in my opinion, straight up. Which group of invertebrates is apparently most closely related to primitive vertebrates? Oh, like really? They're going to ask us this question, and these are, you just got to know it. They don't ask these a lot. You'll probably see one or two on your test, thankfully. So if you don't know this stuff at this level, I would not kill yourself to memorize it all. They're just not common enough to go through and make sure you know what each of these are, like what Annelida is versus mollusca versus Cnidaria versus arthropoda versus Echinodermata. And does anybody actually know the answer to this one? Yep, Echinodermata. It's actually E. So like, it's like one of these things that you either know it or you don't. You're not going to figure it out. Like you can maybe say it's probably not a mollusk. It's probably not a worm. It's probably not an insect, arthropod. So just Cnidaria, I don't even remember honestly what that one is. And in Echinoderms, I sort of know what those are. But you either know it or you don't. So am I giving you permission to not study something? Yeah, I am. I'm totally giving you permission to not study something. This would be low priority because there's so few questions like this. I don't think it's necessary to kill yourself to learn this. If you're missing 1 or 2 questions because of that reason, it's not going to break your score. Okay, then they start putting stuff like this in here. Oh, those are jellyfish? Thank you. I did not know that. And I kind of thought I knew Echinoderms were starfish and things like that, but you know, whatevs. You don't need to know it. You need to know it, but you don't really have to kill yourself to know it. All right, here we go. A segment of DNA with the sequence would be transcribed into messenger RNA segment with the sequence blah. Okay, so we're doing transcription. So you just got to be careful with these. This is where good scratch work would come in. This is where I would write something down before you pick your answer. So let's do that. What would be going with G for my RNA? So I'd have C, what goes with C? G, what goes with A? Ah, I couldn't trap you. I couldn't trap you. There's the trap right there in the question, by the way. What goes with T? AA. Then we have another A, which is U, and then we got CC. So just write it out and match it rather than trying to look at the answers and match it. Because if you just write it out, you're much less likely to make a silly mistake by reading it. So that would make answer choice, so let's see, CCGUAA UCC. Yeah, so answer A is correct in this case. So what's our trap answer in this one? Yep, CCGTAATCC, because they've got the T in there for RNA. So that's the first thing that I would actually do is cross out anything with T in it. Just get those answers out because they can't have T in them. So since they can't have T because they're talking about messenger RNA, those aren't possible answer choices. And then just write out your answer and match it up rather than trying to mentally try to match up answers with the what's in the passage or what's in the question. It's just a simpler way of avoiding silly mistakes because so far I don't think anybody would think that these questions are necessarily hard questions. You might not have remembered the content, but the questions aren't really hard. They're very clear what they're asking. What usually is the case is that makes you go faster because you're confident in your content knowledge, and then you start making silly mistakes like adding a T in there when you shouldn't have, things like that. So these are just a lot of techniques to slow you down, make you take your time. Ooh, genetics. Oh yeah. I'll give you guys a second to read this one, see what you think the answer is. So initially, what is the silly answer in here? Which one's just not right? Actually, I wouldn't call E a silly answer. E's not bad because it's a reasonable answer. A is the silly answer because When's the last time you did a single cross Punnett square and got 10%? Is 10% even a logical answer for this question? Nope. So let's get rid of it. So 10% just isn't something you can get from a single cross. You'd probably be looking at something that's not a single cross, like a triple cross or something like that, even come close to 10%. So it's going to be 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. We know that. So let's see. In a cross involving X-linked trait, male parent has normal color vision. So what does that mean? What's my male? X, Y, and do they have the dominant or the recessive? They have the dominant, cap C, and the female is a carrier. So what's the female? Heterozygous. That's right. So big C, little c. So what's the chance I have a male child? 50%. What's the chance that that child will be afflicted? 50%. So my overall percentage is 25, right? Nope. It's the trap of these types of questions. So the Y is already predetermined because they say that a male offspring will inherit. So that's a guaranteed, and there's only a 50% chance that this guy will come down and will have the dominant trait in the male. So that's just a straight up 50%. If the question was rephrased just a little bit, the question could be different. If they had said, what is the chances that a child would be male and colorblind? If they did that, what's the answer? It'd be 25% because it's including the, is it male or is it female? This one's already predetermining its male. It says straight up in the question that a male offspring. But if it makes it like, what is the chance it could be a male with color blindness, then you've got to include that 50% for being male. So it's a little trick of the writing of these types of questions. So the thing I'm pointing out here is you got to read the gender part of the these types of genetics questions carefully. If it's predetermined, don't do the and part. You don't have to do the gender times the other percentage. If it is a future question saying we don't know if it's male or female yet, then you've got to include the 50% for the gender part of it. So be careful in reading of these questions. This one it often gets people. Again, it's the fact that it's a pretty straightforward question, but if you're not careful, you might miss the wording just a little bit. And then we have just basically the gotcha type questions. You're like, wow, this, if I use logic, this doesn't make any sense. So first off, which two answers are just not good choices here? Yeah, D and E aren't part of germ layers. Those aren't the germ layers. Let's get rid of those. Boom, boom. Now we got A versus B versus C. Ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. This is, you know it or you don't. There's no figuring it out. What is the answer for this question? A, B, or C? That's the trap. It is not the endoderm. It is not the mesoderm. It is the ectoderm. Yes, it is. So this is what I mean. This is a gotcha question. Like, it makes sense in your head that it should be one of the derm layers that's in the middle because the brain and the spinal cord is in the middle. But you've got to remember how the nervous system forms. It forms after the derm layers. So you get the formation of the neural tube, which is that invagination of the embryo, which then seals off, and that's what produces the nervous system. So the ectoderm produces the central nervous system. And that's what I mean. This is a gotcha question because it's just a illogical, it seems like it's illogical in the terminology there, that something outside can produce something that's so integral to an organism. But it is what it is. That is what you got to do. So sometimes if you don't know it, you might have to guess it. And sometimes the guess is not right. So this is why knowing your content is just so darn important. You got to know your facts. Things like this are good. It's good to have like flashcards to do. So a good study technique is to use something like Anki for memorization material, because not all of this is memorization, but there's quite a bit on the DAT that is memorization in the OAT. Like this especially, like what does the ectoderm form? The ectoderm forms skin, hair, teeth, nails, nervous system. Which one of these is not like the others? The mesoderm forms muscles, organs, bones, stuff like that. The endoderm, GI tract. And just so you can, if you just being able to list that stuff off is what is going to make this a doable question in the end of the day. So let's bring it all together. A lot of the things we talked about here weren't necessarily for the content, it was for the strategy. So let's review some of those strategies to make sure we remember them. Cross out what first? That's actually the good test prep term. Cross out the distractors first. The ones that don't really make sense for the content of the question. Okay, what can we do on accept questions? Least not accept questions. True false it. Remove the accept part and then just true false it, pick the false answer. What is often going to tell us where our correct answer is? When we have opposite answers or opposing answers, there's a lot I like to think of a lot of times as spiritual opposites. Like carbon dioxide in the blood and lack of oxygen in the blood, they're technically the same answer, but they're opposites in spirit because they're talking about it in terms of the two opposing gases in our blood. Sometimes you're just going to have to know facts, and that's going to happen too. In these types of questions, what do you want to deal with? The whole answer or part of the answer? Just look at the parts. Don't try to address the whole answer. Go part by part by part and eliminate as you go. That way you don't get trapped in like, you know, okay, I didn't know what pharynx was, but I think it's good, and like picking A or something by accident. So you just got to be focused on the individual pieces and eliminate the pieces. If part of the answer is bad, the whole answer is bad. That's the thing to remember there. And then finally, like literally, there's no elimination you can sometimes do. You just got to get to the answer. Oh, not finally. Finally, sometimes it's worth doing what? Using your scratch paper. Write it out for things like this question or this question where you have a little bit of scratch work. You could do it in your head, but what do you run the risk of if you just do it in your head? Making a silly mistake, and we don't want you making silly mistakes. The tendency is people will do it in their head because they're thinking it goes faster and then screw up, and then you get this cascade effect because you're like, God, I should have gotten that right, and I, you know, and or I knew how to do that, and you don't want to cascade and go down that bad road there.